Ruslan.
I went from death to life. Now there's no reason to be stressing like he did it. It's time to testify. Let's first get the verse and the essence right. You get it? Death to life. Death to life. He did it. Death to life. Let's first get the verse and the essence right. You get it? Apply pressure, but I'm not trying to force it. Down bad before me and mine's courtship. Circling the sun, that's a different type of orbit. Then I fell on my face, but it must have been the Lord's gift. After that, I went from death to life. Only one time he ever said to test him right. The best replies to testify. He conquered it all. He conquered my fall in his presence. Why? I went from death to life. Now there's no reason to be stressing like he did it. It's time to testify. Let's first get the verse and the essence right. You get it? Death to life. Death to life. He did it. Death to life. Let's first get the verse and the essence right. You get it? John 5:24 and it reads, I tell you the truth, whoever listens and believes in God who sent Christ will have eternal life. No condemnation, they cross from death to life. No life to death, no walking dead. I'd rather walk the talk and shine my light instead. Who can ideate the darkest Friday would have transformed to this new life inside me, cause Sunday came. I went from death to life. Now there's no reason to be stressing like he did it. It's time to testify. Let's first get the verse and the essence right. You get it? I went from death to life. Now there's no reason to be stressing like he did it. It's time to testify. Let's first get the verse and the essence right. You get it? Death to life. To life. To life. To life. To life. Death to life. To life. To life. Death to life. Death to life. To life. To life. To life. To life. Death to life.
We are live! Hey, yo, before you come in, take your shoes off. Get your super chats ready. Your questions are getting answered live. But first, shout out to the patrons and the channel members. Check it out. Never miss the after party again. Sign up right now on Patreon for as little as $5 a month and access every replay. Put it in the budget. I'm telling you, we are essential. Y'all already know what time it is. Welcome to the after party with Ruslan.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is that time. We're live. And I need you, yes you, to drop your location in the chat. I need you, yes you, to let me know where you're watching this at. We got the premium partners on Patreon. We got the mods. And we got you watching live all the way from Boise, Idaho, Oklahoma, Texas, DMV, Louisiana, Miami, New Jersey, Texas, Tucson, West Tennessee, Paris, France, Chico, California, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Dual Jacks, baby, Kentucky, Chi-Town, Vancouver, Hawaii, Indiana. Ladies and gentlemen, we're live. Wrong button. There it is. And we got a special guest all the way from the East Coast, Jeffrey Nova Alamonte Film.
You know it.
Yo, that intro just made me want to conquer something or several things.
Hey, we got a special stream. If you guys didn't know who Jeffrey Nova Alamonte. Am I saying that right? Alamonte.
I like that little Italian twist
Alamonte,
to it.
all
It's
right.
Almonte, but
Almonte.
I
Okay,
like that little.
OG YouTuber, cultural icon, is here with us live. If you guys haven't heard his testimony, it's crazy. It's on his channel, and we just did a conversation today. A clip of it dropped called "They Almost Got Him." Okay, so we'll be that already came out if you haven't seen that, and we'll be talking a couple different topics. Folks who don't know who you are, give us your introduction.
My introduction. Just a regular kid from Harlem, with a passion for everything artistic, everything philosophical, everything science. I just love reality and God's creation, pretty much.
Amen. Amen. All right.
One day I got lost in the sauce, and then God got me out.
God got you out. That's a fact. Hey, if you're here live and it's your first time here live, tell me it's your first time here live. I want to give you a personal shout out. If you guys didn't know, the majority of our videos do get made live, usually within this after party stream. We do it Monday through Thursday. And then obviously we also have guests. So like Jeffrey's a guest today. Had a good time with him. The conversation went over 2 hours long, so that's on Patreon right now. It goes live there. So let me give a couple quick shout outs. Shout out to Ricky, first time here. Joshua, first time here. Jamie, first time here. Kelly's first time here. Asher's the first time here. Aaron's first time here. Giqueto Roper, Ryan, Brad. Appreciate you guys being here. Guatemala's in the house. We're international. Okay, so we might meander a little bit. So if you've just seen the videos, the pre-edited videos, the streams are going to be different. I'm just telling you. Okay, so we might chop it up. We might talk. We might talk about the social political state of the world, as the famous quote from
Jaden Smith.
Jaden Smith. Can we even talk about the social political state of the world? We're going to talk about this Elon Musk situation. That's very interesting because a lot of folks have been attempting to share Jesus and faith with Elon. And he came out with this comment right here. Unless there is more bravery to stand for what is fair and right, Christianity will perish. Now, this came out July 27th, which is right as everything hit the fan with the Paris Olympics. I think this is what's in response to happening. Now, just last week, we covered Jordan Peterson going on a conversation that's on X right now where we reacted to Jordan Peterson pressing Elon about, hey, you say you're not religious, but you keep saying you like the teachings of Jesus, but you say you're not religious. Perhaps you are religious and you're just afraid. Why don't you just embrace it? And kept telling them about Bible story after Bible story. So we saw the Babylon Bee try to close him on Jesus, try to get him to say the sinner's prayer, accept Jesus into his heart. And so it's interesting to see Elon flirting with Christianity. But I guess my macro question, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, like, do you think that Christians are not brave and don't stand up enough for Christianity? Or do you think this is like a hijacking of a culture war topic and we need to be more outraged? What do you think? You think Elon has a point here, or you think this is just kind of him placating and kind of pandering to more conservative Christian folk?
I think it's so interesting because I read this two completely opposite ways.
Okay, how'd you read this?
So on one hand, I read it like standing up for what is fair and right, like defending themselves when people mock Christianity. Okay. That's one way where it would be like, oh, the pandering for conservatives. But you can also read it the other way. Okay. Unless there is more bravery to stand up for what is fair and right. The word fair makes me think of standing up for inequality, diversity. So it's like, was this something like, oh, Christians need to get with the times and defend? Oh, you get what I'm saying? Yeah, maybe. A lot of people feel like, oh, Christians are not liked because they don't do anything for the LGBT, or they don't do anything for Black liberation. They don't do. So, coming from that sphere, I myself have heard it time and time again, and I see it in my comment section all the time because, I have plenty of fans that
still flow from that lifestyle.
Right, they come from that, and they're still intrigued in my content regardless of their religious, disagreements.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
I wonder, like, what's what does he mean by that? Elon kind of does that where he it'll be so vague that it could kind of go either way. Yeah.
I'm just guessing because he's been so anti any kind of like LGTV language. Like he banned the word the word cisgendered on X. He said that's a slur now. What? And he's been doing a lot of.
See, I've been out of the loop, so you put me on game.
Yeah. So he's been doing a lot of stuff. He said he lost his kid to the woke mind virus because the kid transitioned. So I think the critique that bravery to stand up for what is fair and right, Christianity will perish. That could be that. I mean, that's a way to look at it. I didn't think about it that way. But yeah, maybe he could be. This is something Zuby, my buddy Zuby, posted, who's had multiple conversations with Elon specifically about faith. And he connected to this. He said, that Christianity to West is finished. We don't need Christianity to be united or be happy. But I get what you're saying. We need people to get serious about doing the work.
I love that response. I'm beginning to come to that conclusion as an atheist. It is hard to accept.
Which one? This one right here?
That bottom one.
Oh, yeah.
I'm beginning to,
I'm beginning to come to that conclusion.
Yeah, because people are starting to realize that all of the values that we have, everything about humanity and even things like equality and individuality and the idea of innate human rights, that's about being made in the image of God. That's about being image bearers. That all ties back. Every moral belief, when people say like, oh, I'm not Christian, but I know my right from wrong. Okay, who taught you right from wrong? Because you didn't come out the womb knowing that. I'll tell you that for sure. Somebody taught you that, and somebody taught them that.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I think there is we take it for granted. We take for granted the values of the West, even to your point, the idea of human rights and human dignity. Like those are definitely very Christian values that don't really exist in other parts of the world that aren't super duper Christianized. Life is just not valued at the same rate. And so even if you have folks that are borrowing from the Christian worldview without even knowing it, it's still ultimately pointing back to who God is, right? That's an interesting positioning that he keeps kind of going back to this idea of Christians needing to stand up for themselves. And
didn't Andrew Tate say something similar?
And Andrew
he was
Tate,
like, "Oh, Christians they're being weak and they're not defending themselves."
Yep. So I guess yes. And so we talked about that yesterday, where he went and protested outside of the French embassy in Romania because of the Olympics thing, right? And he was saying, "You guys need to be angry and you need to be bad." And so I think the question is like, I see enough Christians angry about stuff,
right?
Like I don't know if being more angry persuades the anyone, right?
Yeah, I don't think we need any more angry.
Right. I think we need more conversations. But you said this earlier to me, which was really interesting. You said like, because of how the algorithm is, how can people have conversations with people to disagree with if everyone's in their own silos? Because algorithms is going to work you up what you're already into.
We all have our own like little personal echo chambers. There's no boundaries being crossed. Most of the posts you're seeing, it's all preaching to the choir. Things aren't as controversial as we think because we're just getting everything so personalized that you're seeing one thing. In your view, you see plenty of angry Christians. Whereas
I see a lot of angry Christians.
And somebody else, they're not seeing that content. And so you're living in two completely different realities because information is reality to people now because we're all chronically online. So we think the political state of the world is A, but then you go ask someone else and they're like, no, what are you talking about? It's totally E, F, G, not A, B, C. So, that could be it too. But this whole, if Christians don't stand up for what's fair and right, I mean, number one, any real Christian knows the gates of hell will not prevail against the church.
Amen.
So we ain't going nowhere. It don't matter what you do.
Yep.
We've been dwindled in far lesser numbers.
We've been through worse.
We've been through way worse.
Yes.
So that's why we can have the confidence to not get so outraged because God told us that we would be mocked.
Yeah, that's good. And he was mocked, and Jesus himself was mocked.
Right.
So it's like we want something that Jesus said we would. We people assume as if we are afraid of something that Jesus himself experienced and said others would experience, right? And so I think Elon making these sorts of statements or Andrew Tate making these sorts of statements, I think that they have a fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to turn the other cheek and not repay evil with evil, and right, like these are intrinsically Christian ideals and Christian values that I think people just aren't keeping up with and don't understand the downstream effects. Because what's the alternative? Like chaos, like Christians ushering in chaos and being more outraged and more upset about these things. I think that's a good point. Okay, let's switch gears for a moment. Let me hit this little bump real quick. Hey, if you're just tuning in live, guys, tell me where you're watching this from. Smash that like button. And if it's your first time here, let me know. I'd love to give you a shout out. I may go to Super Chats in a little bit. I wanna ask Jeffrey a couple more questions regarding everything that's been going on, and then we'll jump into a couple other things that are trending right now.
Ruslan.
Okay, so there's a lot of political tension. It's an election year. It's a mess. You come from being viewed online as, and I don't want to like frame you as something maybe you didn't see yourself as, or you didn't, but almost like a leftist creator activist.
Yeah, before left book was even like coined as a term. I was speaking on stuff like Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
Trayvon Martin before they started becoming bumper stickers and stuff.
Yeah, and this is before it was in the mainstream. So this is pre-2020 when it all we started seeing 2016 kind of remnants of it, and then 2020 it really hit the fan after George Floyd. And so now we're in an election year. We're more politically divided than we've ever been. You used to identify like leftist / anarchist. Was that kind of like your political ideology? And this is pre-coming to Christ and having a radical transformation. Like his testimonies on our channel. It's on his channel. You guys can go check that out. But how would you say your political views have changed since coming to faith? Because you referenced Jordan Peterson. You're referencing a lot of like conservative heads now, but that's very different than what your views used to be. And so like what's changed and what stayed the same?
Well, I wouldn't say that my views are conservative or like Jordan. I just, when I left YouTube, I started to watch more stuff that I didn't agree with.
Okay.
But I kind of always was like that. Like a lot of times people be like, you watch this person? I'm like, yeah, what? You think that I watch people that I agree with? That's kind of boring.
Yeah.
You know, I watch people that I disagree with.
Yeah. As do I. Like I watch like the Young Turks. I don't know if you know who FD Signifier is. He's like
FD Signifier.
Oh, bro. He's the only one that like really gets under my skin because there's just so many presuppositions about the world. I'm just like, oh, bro. Okay. But go ahead.
He's a good video essayist. Though.
He's a great video essayist. But then when he gets on his like hyper political, like destroy property values, not probably destroy property rights and like the real Marxist stuff, I just go, oh, bro, this is dark, you know? But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I would say what changed, a lot has changed socially, of course, because a lot of and all of that stuff crosses over. You have the socio-political, economic state of the world, as you said with Jaden Smith, right? So those are three things, right, that kind of formulate somebody's like view of the world.
Yeah.
To this day, I still haven't voted, and I still don't support anyone that is that is like running right now.
Yeah.
There's nothing that I see that glorifies God in any way, and that's my number one. Me, if it doesn't glorify God, then it doesn't deserve my attention. But then there's like liberties that God gives us, especially when it comes to like our finances and economics, to where there's a lot more leeway with stuff like that. You know, like Jesus didn't preach capitalism. He also didn't preach communism, despite what a lot of leftists like to say, like, oh, Jesus would have been a socialist and he fought for women's equality. I'm like, bro, God did not become, you know, man in the flesh to say, oh yeah, I'm gonna fight for these political issues that y'all already, you know. I would say what's changed a lot is the social aspects, like my views on the nuclear family. I was a relationship anarchist, you know, polyamorous, didn't believe in marriage, didn't care to have children. I didn't think it was important to have both a mother and a father in a home, or have a two-parent household. I thought, like, you know, it takes a tribe anyway, so it doesn't matter if a child has two mothers and one father, or two fathers and one mother, or a whole polycule of people. So that's probably the most radical change socially.
Do you think that was because you were brought up in a nuclear family, your mom and dad together, loving Jesus, and you kind of took it for granted?
Yeah. Well, that probably did play a part in it. Yeah, that definitely had to play a part in it, especially as I started to meet more people who had parents that were divorced. And especially, like, you know, my wife being one who grew up with parents that were divorced. So, you know, seeing the differences and how our lives played out and just the dynamics of the families and how that changes things, I'm like, there is something to that. Because, yeah, I didn't grow up with the perfect family in the world. But, you know, there were times that I wished my mom and dad did get a divorce because, you know, they were in conflict. But then later on, I'm like, I'm glad they stuck it out.
Yeah, glad they
because
fought.
That taught me that things can be worked out, that there is such a thing as forgiveness and restoration and reconciliation.
That's good.
Whereas that is very hard for people to think of if they have divorced parents. Now you have to kind of get over that hurdle of, if my parents didn't work it out, am I going to be able to work it out? Right? Like, is it going to be like another continuation of the cycle?
Yeah.
Whereas I took for granted that I had that example to this day, still together, despite everything that happened. You know, marriage isn't easy. Things happen.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good. I think there are aspects that, as someone who didn't have both of my parents, even before I was a Christian, I knew that like, I'm not going to repeat the cycle. You know what I mean? Like I knew, like I wanted my wife in a home. I wanted to be around my kids. I wanted to be in the same household as them. And I'm not saying those of you guys that are like in blended families or anything like that, like you failed and it's beyond. That's not what I'm saying. God uses those situations too. But for me, I knew for a fact that like I wanted to have what I didn't have for my kids and my wife and my family. And so it's interesting to hear you say that as someone that was in a family, though it wasn't perfect, right? So in that, your social views changed a lot. You believe in a nuclear family, and then you
have the economic and the political part,
the economic political part,
which those things are even more heavily intertwined because you have stuff like Marxism, which is both political and economic. I still would be considered, I guess you could say, an anarcho-syndicalist, where I believe in workers' rights. I believe, like, I have a lot of faith in companies being able to work mutualistically. I don't know if you ever heard of mutualism, or like companies that are, have not only co-founders but co-owners, where the workers also have a piece of that pie, and they have the incentive to work on it because there's ownership. They actually own a piece of that, rather than, oh yeah, I'm just making the same wage no matter what. There's this capitalist idea of, oh, well, there's no incentive to work if everyone owns it. It's like, well, it's kind of the opposite. And it's not just, oh, there's only capitalism and there's only communism, right? Like, because if we're all making 15, why am I going to come the next day to work for the same 15? I'm going to do better. Oh, I'm going to work harder than everyone else for the chance at a promotion for like $2 extra. I still have no real ownership.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think, so here's what I think. I think a lot of people, unfortunately, in our society conflate capitalism with corporatism.
Right.
Like corporatism is like massive businesses too big to fail, the Amazons, the Walmarts, right? And in a capitalistic society, and I'm with you, I'm not saying like Jesus was like pro-capitalism, but there's principles of capitalism like the investing, the right to own property, and the right to own the capital, which creates the outcome, right? I think all those things are presupposed in the scriptures, meaning like how many parables are there about plowing the land and right? Farming metaphors over and over. So I think there's certain things that presuppose capitalism, but I think where a lot of people make valid arguments is that they have an issue with corporatism or crony capitalism, right? Where it's like these monopolistic ventures that just grow so big, and then the people at the bottom are like, I don't want to say exploited, but to an extent exploited, and there's no upward mobility and there is no ownership. Whereas the folks that I know that run small businesses end up doing what you just described, right? They give the people incentive, whether that's through bonus structures or percentages of the businesses or whatever, right? And so I think maybe the issue isn't capitalism. Maybe the issue is the downstream effects of deregulation to allow monopolies to flourish. And then when the monopolies flourish, guess what you got? You got a bunch of Walmarts, Amazons, huge companies that you don't own the shares of. You know what I mean? And I think in terms of the shares, I think it is interesting that we are in a society where you can own a Tesla share. Like that's pretty fire. You know what I mean? Like, and I remember when I was in high school, I understood stocks and mutual funds, and I remember trying to buy and get into a mutual fund, and it was so hard. You got to have $2,000 cash, and you have to go find a financial planner.
Now you go on Cash App.
Now you go on Cash App, and you could buy Tesla shares right now. Like that's pretty incredible how much the economics of even investing have changed. Where now, at least in our society, anyone, and I'm being literal, I would say anyone, even poor people struggle, can own assets of an appreciating value. And that's not forever. That's recent. That's within the last 5 years. We've just gotten Robinhood, Cash App, right? Like these are all relatively modern things. Now, obviously, you got to be able to have the cash flow to save and put into those assets, right, consistently. But I think that's very unique. And my advice would be like when you're talking about what you're talking about, I think that's a fair critique. My heart would be like, okay, cool. Is it possible to work with small business owners that are more fair with their employees?
Oh yeah, definitely.
You know what I mean?
Because even like when you think of anarcho-syndicalism or like just anarchy in general, it's just like I had discussed with you earlier. It's like it's not about just hierarchy in general, because there's justified hierarchy and there's unjustified hierarchy.
Yeah, give me an example of justified versus unjustified hierarchy.
A justified hierarchy would be like a leader, right? Like Moses was the leader. He was, he was the leader. It wasn't unjustified. The people counted on him to get certain things done. But Moses wasn't like, okay, all of the manna's falling out of the sky and I'm taking most of it because I'm the leader. And now you each get one piece, but I'm going to have more just because I'm the leader. I'm the leader in terms of I'm calling the shots, and you guys, it's a mutual, like it's a trusting thing. Yep. Right? It's like even in a family, you have a husband and a wife. Sure, he's the head of the family. He's leading, and the wife and the children, they're all willfully submitting to your will. But at the same time, you're not like, oh, I'm the one that's busting my behind at work, so I'm going to take most of this money and I'm going to give y'all some crumbs. Okay. You get me? Like, I'm going to take $1,000 allowance and the rest of y'all get 10.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's what you have is like, it's kind of a systemic failure to where capitalism, it has to be, you can't just have straight up capitalism with no regulation, right? Like people are going to abuse that power the more. Like when you're at small business level, like you said, you don't really see those imbalances. It's as the wealth starts to exponentially accrue.
It's when Boeing gets deregulated.
And then
you're like,
get
whistleblowers.
Right. So that there's just certain things. It's just like, and God is a God of balance. He has certain way, even servants. There was a certain way that you were to treat servants. You couldn't just do whatever you wanted.
That's right.
You couldn't just abuse people just because, so in that same sense, you can have markets even within socialism. Like that's what I'm saying. Like people always think like, oh, all of leftism is no market. Just the state controls the entire market, but that's not necessarily true.
Not in Scandinavian nations. They have a balance of high safety nets, to your point, with still a high competition in capitalism. Like Sweden specifically, I think capitalism may have been like really streamlined from Sweden initially, and now people may not see Sweden like a capitalistic nation, but it's very capitalistic, right? There's still massive innovation, massive tech happening there. I think the issue though with those nations is then does everybody want to pay more in taxes, right? And that's where we get into like what is fair, what isn't fair. You have, I want to say the average rate in Sweden is around 45%. And everybody's paying more, right? Versus here, you have the top 10% paying in 75% of the taxes, and then you have the bottom 90% paying 20. You know what I mean? Like, so then it's like, well, how much more can you just quote unquote tax the rich before wealth flight happens? Because wealth flight's a real thing, right? People would just leave. I mean, look how many people left California for Florida, and then you get to those states, and then they'll go to Puerto Rico. Let's just flat out, or they'll go to Monaco. Let's just go to flat out tax havens. So that's the dangerous part about like overtaxing. Overtaxing people.
You start to decentivize doing well. Because I'm like, all right, if I'm going to get taxed more for doing well, maybe I just shouldn't do well.
No, for real, for real. I mean, really, I know people that have intentionally not claimed money on their taxes that they earn from tips because they don't. They know that they would lose certain assistance or certain programs, and that, to your point, that or they'll just pay more in taxes, and then you just go, well, that doesn't really. And then to get real estate, you got to earn more, you got to claim more, right? And like I remember as an entrepreneur, like here's a practical example where the temptation was real for me. We do shows, we'd have show money. Show money was cash, and so it's like if you making $2,000-3,000 a night off of selling T-shirts and CDs or whatever. This is 10 years ago CDs. You may be tempted to not claim that because you don't want to pay taxes on that. And so I think that's the rub with like overtaxation, which 115 years ago, we didn't have federal income. Like taxes were like 3%. You know what I mean? And now it's like in California, bro, you could be paying up to 62% in taxes. New York and California. Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah. And so it's like, how do you find that balance in terms of creating economic mobility for people that really want it? And how many people want it? How many people are just hanging on by a thread and don't have the capacity to do anything else? How many people have the opportunity and have the capacity, but they're distracted with chasing pleasure, perpetually pleasure chasing? Like, this is where it gets super, super complicated, because people are complicated creatures. Like, some people are legitimately like that single mother who perhaps was married and her husband died and now she's a widow and she literally just can work and take care of her kids. She's not going to have the economic mobility to be like, I'm going to go learn coding and learn how to video edit so I could, like, that's not realistic. But the person that's like 18, 19, who is perhaps growing up in a neighborhood like you did, may not have the imagination and the access to go, I'm going to learn video editing so I can go work for another creator, so I can then learn to be a better creator, so that I could, you know what I mean? And so it's like, there's real obstacles that people are dealing with. How do you think is a reasonable way to stir hope in people, right? Because I think our end prescriptions will be the same, regardless on if you're talking about anarchists, which I'm not fully tracking all the way what that means yet, or I'm talking capitalism. I think the prescriptions will be the same for people to hopefully change their situation for the better.
I think it ultimately, we have to center it back to Christ. Like, how would Christ behave? Like, even in that moment that you had, okay, you have all this money, you can take it for yourself, or you can realize, you know what? I care about my fellow man. And I know that the taxes I pay and everybody else pays, I'm taking advantage of a lot of public goods that we have, right? Like, markets are great. Markets are great for creating value, especially in a very short period of time and, booming business. But you have certain things that it's like, do you want someone to be able to hoard water resources? Do you want someone to be able to hoard railroads? Like, certain things that need to be publicly owned, which we pay taxes for, rather than someone kind of just have a monopoly on that thing, because those things are very easily monopolized. How many railroads can you make? You know, right?
Yeah.
How many lakes can you have? I mean, there's certain things that they're not really created, right? There's certain resources that are natural resources, or things that going back to the idea of human rights. What's a human right? Like, do we have a right to be able to go and fetch some water from a lake, right? Is that our God-given right, or is it not? Like, so that's something that people contend with. Like, people say, like, medical care is a right. That's something that's controversial. And then when you talk about Medicare, you get into even heavier conversations of like, oh, well, what if someone wants gender-affirming surgery? Is that medical care? Then are they entitled to that?
What if somebody wants an abortion?
Are they entitled to that?
Right.
So you start to get into conversations like that. It's a fundamental issue of what's a human right, what's like the dignity of a person. And I think as Christians, we have to think of what's dignified, regardless of whatever economic system we're in. Like, I can have my values of anarchism, where I believe it should be a rotating state and rotating ownership of certain things, so that all of the power doesn't just flow into one person's hands. And you have industries that are, collectively owned, but they're able to still trade and create and compete with other, industry stuff like that. But where there's not just like a CEO that's making 140 times more than,
I never understood. I never understood that. Like, I never understood. Listen, I think if people derive certain value in a marketplace, they should be compensated fairly. I think in that, though, I never understood why would a CEO want such a disparity between their employees and them. Like, I don't think that's a good look.
I wouldn't feel right. Like, me as a Christian, I would not feel right. And even before I was like in my walk with Christ, but even more so now, I don't know how I would feel to be like the head of a fast food company, and I'm like literally a billionaire, and my lowest employee like is living paycheck to paycheck, like, and has to be on food stamps. But at the same time, I think the other side of the argument, that's the reason why a lot of these billionaires are okay with that, because they know, well, the government's going to step in and give them some food stamps anyway.
Yeah, well,
you have that safety net, which makes them seem, it makes things seem less cruel than they are.
Yeah, so the safety net is an interesting thing, because I think you don't qualify for many programs unless you make less than $19,000 a year I think that's the number that I just looked at on a Johnny Harris video. I think the thing about taxes that I think is a fair, this is my critique, is like, I don't think the government is efficient at almost anything. Like, I think they're actually inefficient at most things. So the thing is that it's not that, obviously there's roads and there's infrastructure and like
stuff that it has to
yes,
get done.
Yes.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about the military industrial complex, when you're $500 to swap out a toilet seat, like these are real things that people in that world have talked about. When you're talking about the DMV, when you're talking about, right, like most government subsidized things or controlled things aren't very efficient. They're actually very inefficient. And so then it comes down to, okay, so I don't know that I trust the government to do much of anything because it's so, and they keep going in debt every year, $32 trillion in debt across Republicans and Democrats, right? So they can't keep a budget. Like me, that wouldn't work for me or you, right? Like we have, like what comes in gets spent. We don't get to go in debt every month, right? Like that's not how anyone's checkbook works. Our government's going crazy with debt. And so, which is a whole like fiscal modern monetary policy nonsense.
To add a little bit to what you just said, it's funny. We used to have a term back in my leftist days that America is capitalism for the poor, but communism for the rich, because they're always getting bought out. They're always getting like
bailed out.
Yeah,
banks get bailed out, and I think that's wrong.
So it's communism. It's like it's a welfare state for them.
Yeah, I think that's wrong, and I don't think rich people should be bailed out. I also don't think rich people should be taxed at exorbitant amounts, because this is what then it creates. It creates the loophole. So the loophole is, so when we're talking about the CEO making billions and the employees make, the CEO makes billions not because that's what he is on his W-2s. Right. Tim Cook is, I think his salary is $2 million.
Yeah, some people don't even take a salary at all. They're just making plenty with the shares that they have in the company.
The shares, and those shares are taxed different.
Yep.
So then they're taking the shares. The shares is what actually makes up their net worth.
And as long as they didn't sell any.
And they don't sell any, and then what they do, and even if they sell some, then you're getting taxed different on those. But the real joke is, I'm just gonna borrow against my assets.
Right.
And pay nothing.
Yep.
So Tim Cook has $100 billion in Apple. I'm throwing out numbers in Apple stock, and he makes $2 million on paper, but then he just borrows against a couple billion of that and lives $1 billion lifestyle. Like that's whack. Like that's kind of trash.
Yeah.
But that's what happens when you have these tax policies that are progressing in the rates. So let me ask you this: what percentage do you think? That's a loaded question. What percentage of the folks that are struggling do you think it's faith in Jesus that can turn it around, right? Versus a lack of access to information, good information, versus a lack of useful skills and how to build those, versus like actual things that are suppressing people. You know what I mean? Like how would you, like if you had to break it down from in terms of the way you grew up, right? How would you sort that in terms of what's causing people who are in poverty to stay in? Because my view is that unfortunately, in any system, power and money are always going to flow up. It's always going to go up, and that's like the 20/80 principle, right? And it sucks. But from your vantage point, what like how would you sparse that? How much of it is lack of information, lack of imagination? Which is real. Like if you're growing up and you're in the same environment every day and no one around you is successful, that's a real challenge.
Yeah.
Lack of good information. Okay, everyone's telling me to go to college, but you know what? If I went and became a plumber, I'd actually make more money than the dude that went to college. That's information. And then like actual resources to get to the public transportation, to get to the school, to get to the, you know what I mean? Like how would you sparse that out?
It's interesting. Like what was it Jesus said that he who has more will be given to him, and he who has less, even
what he
less
has will be taken. Yeah,
right.
That's what I mean by money always travels up. That's what I mean by the 20/80. Jordan Peterson calls that the Matthew principle, which is really sad. Like that sucks. I'll tell you what I think the solution is.
You make money by having money.
Yes, you make money by having money.
That you have more resources by having the resources already.
Yes,
and so, I think it's the fact that people not only do they not, like, there's plenty of community programs and stuff. There's so many things that I grew up in the hood with that were free. Like I had free karate lessons. We had this thing that was called the Beacon. Like you could go there and they had a swimming pool access. They had like basketball, all types of different things you could get into. They like you can go and do your homework. Yeah. There's a lot of resources, but the thing is, resources is one thing, and then it's like the family structure. There's so many different failures happening at so many different levels. Like you have kids that are going home to abusive environments too. Just because that's what poverty creates, you know, and it just snowballs. It's like from, you know, whether it be single mothers or the two people that are together, but they're alcoholics or they're on drugs or whatever, which that obviously is going to drain your money and all your resources. All of that's going to that continues a cycle of poverty or mental illness. It's so many different things going on that it's hard to just pin it to one thing. And that's the thing when it comes to like this poverty issue or the wealth gap issue, that's why I don't put too much stake in politics anymore or like yeah, I can have my views and we can disagree and say like, oh, in theory this might work, but it's like it might, right? But it's like it's not that one thing, and we like to blame this one system for something, but it's just so many things that's going on to where it's like, okay, you can give somebody all these different resources and put it in their hands and say this is the blueprint, this is how you do it, and for whatever reason it still doesn't happen, not even because they don't want it, but for various other things. Because like you said, growing up and having no examples of success, seeing that literally everyone you went to school with is still the same or worse off than their parents were because the economy has tanked and everything is way more expensive than it was before. And, you know, college doesn't take you where we thought it was, the way they sold it to us. And all of these promises that we had of like, okay, just follow this straight and narrow and you'll get the middle-aged family with the picket fence. It's, you know, plenty of kids, you know, still working in fast food with a bachelor's degree, with even people with master's degrees that just like underemployed. So it's hard to really pinpoint one thing. And it's not just a resource, because like I said, there are resources in a lot of places like the inner city, stuff like that. I think a lot is lacking in mentorship. You have churches that kind of have become this point of just like I said before, it's a checklist that people mark off. Oh, I went to church this Sunday. That's it. I'm gonna wipe my hands clean. The pastor says, oh, I'm gonna just come and preach this message and hopefully they're receiving it. If not, then whatever. And, you know, or nowadays we have people like with life groups and stuff like that. I think the church needs to do more to be practical in people's lives and give them real skills, like practical, because we need to build a kingdom. We need to be the only way that Christian values will be implemented when it comes to wealth is if Christians get wealthy. How else? How else? We can't keep going. We can't keep I've always been happy with little. I grew up with little. You know, I've always been a resourceful person. I can do a lot with little. But I've come to a point in my life, I'm like, I want to give. I've had people that have come to me and just given me money. I'm like, I want to be able to do that. I want to be able to afford to just have disposable income and just be like, hey, I just wanted to bless you today. Like, I just want, you know what I'm saying? I want to be able to fund some stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like, look at what, for example, you look at Angel Studios, right? And then people were complaining like, oh, they're Mormon or this, then the third. Okay, but the Mormons, they must be doing better than us because they got all of this money that they're putting together to actually spread Jesus, right?
Mormons. There's definitely there's a work ethic within there. There's not just a work ethic, but there's my dentist is Mormon, which by the way that might be controversial. My dentist is Mormon. So there's a work ethic, but then there's what's that thing with where the dollar stays within the community? It, like
group economics.
Group economics. There's group economics, right? Which the Jewish people are really good at, and then the Mormons are really good at.
That's literally what who Dr. Umar Johnson, he always talks about that. He's like, the Jews always keeping their money together, and we need to do the same thing.
And so do the Mormons, right? The Mormons hire their own. They go to their own, and there's a lot of successful business people and just people that crush it in the marketplace in the Mormon. So here's kind of piggybacking on that. So here's my solution, which kind of echoes what you're saying. So my solution, like I go back to scripture like you do, and I look at Matthew 24 and 25. Matthew 24, end times, the desolation. What is it? The desolation of the abomination of the desolation of abomination. In Matthew 24, crazy stuff is happening, right? And it's like end time stuff. Then it goes into Matthew 25. Matthew 25 opens with the parable of the wise and the foolish virgins, meaning Jesus is coming back, the bridegroom's coming back. The wise virgins had enough oil to be prepared. The foolish virgins didn't. Then it goes right into the parable of the talents, right? Which you're familiar, which is like every capitalist's favorite Bible passage, right? It's like the parable of the talents, invest and get more, right? Which I'm all for. And then but the beautiful part, and this is in the gospel, is that Jesus juxtaposes the parable of the talents, and then he goes right into caring for the least of these.
Right.
Now, the chapters and the verses in our Bibles didn't get added until around the year 1500. Actually, by some.
So that was just all one stream of consciousness.
That was all one stream of consciousness. So you got Jesus talking about, hey, invest, right? Luke says in the KJV, occupy till I come, right? And then it goes from the parable of the talents right into caring for the least of these. And the least of these is, hey, I was naked and you clothed me. I was hungry, you fed me. I was in jail, you visited me. Which are like, those are pretty controversial things to say. Why were you in jail, Jesus? What were you in jail for, right? And then they go, when did we see you naked and clothe you? When did we see you hungry and feed you? When did we visit you in jail? And he goes, what you have done to the least of these, you've done unto me. And then he separates the goats from the sheep. And so I think, this is my theory, I think the parable of the talents going right into that is intentional. I think what Jesus is getting at is that, hey, those of you guys that have the ability, that have the skill set, that have the talent, that have the capacity, that have the opportunity, go and make the most of that so that you can care for your brother that doesn't have or can't, or the widow or the orphan or the marginalized. I know that's a trigger word for people, right? And especially like beyond the United States. How many people don't have clean drinking water? How many people are like really living without the gospel? They don't even have Bibles allowed in certain countries. And so when I look at that together, I go, okay, I think that's the solution. You said a word earlier that I think really stands out to me, which is mentorship, right? Like sometimes just having access to someone that's a season ahead, right? Like I have my pastor, his kids are all teenagers and out of the home, basically. They're all adults. And my kids are 3 and 9. Just having access to someone that's a season ahead that can like help you. I want to have godly kids, right? But I think the mentorship, and ultimately I think, like you said, like Christians building wealth so that more of us can have companies that we can give people incentives and a profit share, right? Like here, we just do a gross percentage. So everyone here, we hit our payroll and we hit a certain amount. Everyone here gets a percentage of the gross, not the net. They know every dollar that comes in. They know every dollar that goes out, more or less, right? Like I had to buy a new Roadcaster Pro or whatever. Like generally speaking, I'm not like buying a jet, right? Like that's not what we do here. But they know what comes in, and they know that, hey, we're getting a percentage of the gross revenue that comes in, right? And to me, to your point earlier, like, that not only is that incentive, but like I want my people to do good. Like I want my people to go and buy homes and to build wealth and to take care of their families and not have to stress about finances and not have to stress about healthcare and that to me is kingdom capitalism. Like that to me is kingdom. Let's take care of our own because that's God's heart, And as we take care of our home, Dave Ramsey has this idea of us now. So you, your family, your nuclear family, then your extended family now, and then them. So that you first take care of home base, and you make sure you're good, you make sure your extended family is good, and then you think about extending beyond your circle into your local community, into your global community, right? And so I think like there's this beautiful blueprint and tapestry of this in Scripture. And I think you nailed it, where it's like, the more people actually use their time, talent, and treasure for the glory of God, the more people we could help. Because all those things that Jesus talked about, visiting somebody in prison, clothing somebody, feeding, you need resource. Yeah. Like somebody has to have a flexible schedule to go and visit people in prison and do prison ministry. Somebody has to have access to buy extra clothes to clothe people who don't have clothes.
And that's the thing too, like, think of all the wealthy women that sponsored Jesus, right? And when you think of Acts, what the wealthy people did then, for the church, it's, of course, if I'm a neurosurgeon working 60-hour, 70-hour work weeks. What time do I have really for ministry? But I'm making all of this excess money. I can be sponsoring someone that is in ministry, and that's what they do.
That's right.
But people see that, especially because of pressures from the world, and that has infiltrated a lot of the church where they're like, I'm not going to tithe. Well, I got to give my money to you. Like, oh, you trying to sell me spirituality? No, they're working for their wages. That's a service. Do you know what it takes to sit down and exegete the Bible? Like, do you know what it takes to sit down and like really understand this and prepare a message to come and like you're at a high position of scrutiny to where I'm done if I teach you something false. I'm done. So week after week, we have ministers that are, you know, coming to us with the word and teaching us, and they're on their knees and they're praying, and that's what they do. They're the priest.
Yep.
They're the priest.
That's good. That's good. Shout out to everybody who's here live. I'm here with Jeffrey Nova. I don't know if his channel is pinned up, but he has a crazy testimony. We just shared a clip of it on the main channel. So if you haven't seen that, I think this will redirect to that. Just looking at your guys' chat. If you're first time here, let me know it's your first time here. I'd like to give you a personal shout out. So, somebody said, Scarlet Snow said, some of those things you mentioned, Ruslan, don't require money either, like visiting the widow, giving clothes. Well, I think the clothes have to come from somewhere.
Right.
So you got to have extra clothes. I do agree that visiting the widow, but the thing about visiting somebody in prison is like, when was the last time you went and visited somebody in prison? I've went and visited people in prison.
Evangelizing the nations costs money.
Yeah, it costs money. Visiting somebody in prison costs time. You got to have a whole day off to go to usually a location way off site, get on a bus, get on, you know what I mean? Like,
there's some people saying, oh, you can't serve God and mammon. But here's the thing. It's not the love of money. Money we're just using as a tool to glorify God. Right. We're not just getting money to enrich ourselves. We're not getting money for vanity, right? It's the love of money is the root of evil, but that's not we're not chasing money and, you know, pleasure.
Right.
What we're realizing is, okay, we need money in order to help the poor. Right? Like who's going to feed them? Where are we going to get these resources from if not from people that donate to the church? People that are willing to give their wealth. You know what I mean? Like, I would be cool with just $40,000-$50,000 a year. Anything after that, I would be giving it away. I've always I don't really need much. Like, I wish I had a ton of money I could just be giving away, but I want that money to be able to help to make programs, to really start things that can help people. Right? Like, even nonprofits, people hear nonprofit and they think it means everything's free. No, people have to get paid for their time.
Yeah, that's a fact. This is an interesting take. So someone said, none of these things would cost anything if we did not allow the government to strip away our rights to food and free of travel. We need licenses to go fish hunt. We are not free. God gives. So I think what they're saying is the over-regulation of things like fishing and things like, I guess, water supplies. This is an interesting take. I think the government strip away our rights. I mean, listen, I think if we go 500 years ago, how did you get food? Did you guys know that the first grocery store was created less than 100 years ago? That means that up until 100 years ago, like, everybody just got the food that they could eat for the day. Like, if you worked on a farm or if you were out here trying to get food. So I think yeah, but I'd much rather be alive today than 100 years ago where we didn't have grocery stores. Right. So this idea of like a right to food, you'd have to hunt.
Yeah. There is no right. You have to still go and work for it.
Go work.
You
for
still
got to
work. Somebody, fam. Yo, I seen this documentary.
Somebody had to work on that food.
Yo, going back to the whole communism thing. Yeah. One of the things that kind of opened my mind a little bit was I was watching this documentary of this woman who lived both. She had a dual citizenship to Cuba and Spain, so she was just to and fro.
Okay,
and she would often, like, since Cuba started kind of opening their markets a little bit after Fidel Castro passed away, and his brother started opening the markets a little bit more. She would get clothes from Spain and come and sell it to Cubans because they didn't have access to whatever clothes that Spain had, certain name brand clothing. And they asked her, they were like, capitalism or communism? What do you think? You know, because you're in both places. Yeah. She said, como quiera hay que trabajar, which means regardless, you have to work. Capitalism or communism, you still have to work.
Yeah.
She said capitalism, you know, at least in Spain, I have a little bit more freedom to get the money however I feel like doing it. You know, like I don't have nobody rationing out food to me.
That's it. That's
you know what I'm saying? Whereas in Cuba, I'm not sitting here waiting for you to give me my one chicken, you know, for the week or something.
Yeah, and that's bro, that's the fact. My mom, so I think I've told you this. So I grew up in Soviet communism in Azerbaijan. My mom worked as a phone receptionist. My dad worked as a cook in Moscow, and then would smuggle contraband from other parts of the world, like China. Like he get VCRs and stuff like that, and hustle contraband into the country. Coming to America, she was able to become a blackjack dealer and deal cards and you know, do well. My dad ended up becoming an entrepreneur here, right? So absolute different. Like you got someone that was a cook and someone that was a phone receptionist, and like their life in this system, even though it wasn't perfect, was substantially better than their life there because they got to choose what they did for work. You know what I mean? Let me go to this super chat real quick. Shout out to Gabe. Thank you for the super chat. Gabe said, I think what you guys are saying is extremely simple and straightforward. I think too many Christians expect everything for free. Shout out to Dave with the shout out to Gabe with the David Wood photo on his icon. Appreciate you for the super chat. Yeah, listen, I think that whoops, didn't mean to do that. I think this is a complicated conversation. I always like hearing from folks who come from a different environment, because I think we take for granted how much our environment shapes who we are. I grew up in San Diego, and in the early 90s, which is a very different San Diego, the city of San Diego. And because of the neighborhood I was in, I got arrested, not because of the neighborhood, because of bad choices, my dad not being there, trauma. I got arrested at age 11, and then I got really bad grades, like my GPO in 7th grade, GPA.
Yeah, it went to like 1.0.
Yeah, it was like a 1.0. And I thought I was going to get held back for 7th grade again. And then when I came here, I grew up 8th grade, I came here. And just the change of like not having to worry about the other kids from the other neighborhood jumping me, not having to worry about getting into a fight. It puts
you in a whole different mindset.
Just not being afraid of my health and my wellness.
When I left New York, that's what happened to me too.
Yeah,
I'm like, I could go get my education. I could walk down the street. I don't feel like I'm constantly looking over my shoulder.
Yes.
That's one of the factors. That's one of the factors. You know, you can
Yeah.
give somebody all of these resources and stuff, but at the end of the day, it's like the Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
If someone does not feel safe,
yes,
that whole, you can't jump skip to the self-mastery, or what's at that pinnacle? What's that called? Self-actualization.
Yeah.
You can't skip to that part that you don't even feel safe, right? But there's something about Jesus, right? There's something about Jesus to where like even when you don't feel safe in your flesh, he gives you like this sort of peace.
Yeah.
And you just that's kind of like how I felt like when I went back to New York. It's like I felt that peace. I'm like, okay, it might not be the safest situation, but I'm just confident in whatever God's gonna do. So I think that's how a lot of poor people that are Christian, they become content with God. But I think that sometimes that content, they think like it's bad for them to want more as far as the natural in the natural world, in the physical world, right? Like God gives us a lot of freedom. Like I remember my apostle, he was preaching this literally on Sunday. He was like, if you want to be poor, be poor. If you want to be rich, be rich. God is not going to force you to do either or, right? You know, it depends on the life you want to have, but he's not really dictating each and every single detail. He gives us a lot of freedom, more than people think. And there's just certain things that you want to do, whatever works you want to do, however you want God to use you. Sometimes you got to set up your life in a certain way so that you can be able to do those things.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. It's ultimately what you value. Some people genuinely value a simple, quiet life. They don't want the hassle of starting a business or, you know, taking too much risk. And that's totally fine. I think you're totally right. Shout out to Calamity. I like this comment because he's getting specific, and I'm actually with him here. He says, we need to get rid of zoning laws so people can start buying out rented units they lived in. We can pull $20 billion from the $820 billion military budget to build more livable and buyable buildings. Bro, I went down a rabbit hole of mixed zone usage and communities that are flourishing because you can build little cities within commercial and commercial and what's the other one? Commercial and residential.
Right, yeah, I was about to say residential.
And so when you build these communities, you got, a gym, a school, grocery store, movie theater, park, apartments or condos all on the same property. These are some of the most popular places to live, communities. And if you go to Europe, that's how a lot of Europe is, right? You go to Paris, like everything is walking distance. And in America, we've separated the residential from the commercial. So it's very difficult. So like you got all these big box retail shops shutting down because of Amazon, and these buildings are sitting empty and no one wants to go in and rezone them so you could put affordable housing, apartments, condos. So you could really turn stuff around. And all along, like we got all these empty buildings and a massive homelessness problem all over LA, San Francisco, New York. And it's like, man, if some of that was deregulated, you could really build. I'm not saying they're going to be like these, utopian societies, but you could build communities.
Little metropolitan areas.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so interesting that you said it because I'm like, that's so crazy. I never thought of that because I guess I took for granted that in New York, everything is walkable. You have apartments on top of businesses. Yeah. You have the bodega and literally there'll be like a door right next to it. You take stairs and then there's apartments above it.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine living above a bodega. But
yeah. Well, that's some of the most popular places to live now. Like there's whole communities where you have condos right next to. I mean, this is obviously
you go right downstairs for whatever you need.
That's right. Go to the grocery store. And so I think the zoning issues definitely create more red tape to build more housing, and because you have more red tape to build more housing, the housing becomes expensive. It becomes unaffordable for most people. And then what is the best wealth building tool in America? It's real estate. It's owning property. Yeah. And so if you price out a huge chunk of the population, and I mean, like I'm a YouTuber, bro, and it was so difficult for us just to get into this house. And you've been around my house. Like this ain't like the biggest house on the block. Like I live in a blue collar neighborhood, but just to get into this house was crazy. You know what I mean? And that was 1.5 years ago. The house next door to mine sold for $950,000 next door. That's an insane amount. And so it's like the only way someone gets in the house is if they're a multimillionaire or if they already had a house from 15 years ago that they sold and pulled $500,000 out in equity and were able to put the down payment
I'm not
down.
even surprised anymore by these prices, bro. Because I'm just like, you're like 950. I'm like, that sounds a little bit doable. Psych.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's crazy. So when you just think about these things, I'm like, gosh, man, like I feel like I'm so fortunate as being an immigrant. I remember food rations. I remember lining up for food rations. I remember water rations. We'd have a tub of water for the week. And I would say being an immigrant is probably the biggest privilege I have because I just have the privilege of perspective. And I want people to have access to the same opportunities I had in terms of just being able to be a homeowner. Like I want more people to be able to work towards that. And I think the way things are going, it's just like, I don't know. My kids are going to be fine. They got trust funds and college. Like they're going to be okay. But I just think about kids that grew up like I did or kids that came from another country, not because they were the, what is that called? Like exceptional, you know what I mean? Like, immigrants come over and it's like the best of the best.
Right.
And then there's like
well, you're
us.
like the top 1% IQ. I mean, of course.
But then there's like refugees. They're like, we ain't the best of the best. We're the bottom of the barrel, average people. And I want like the person that's coming from the bottom to be able to have a shot at building wealth so they can help people, And I don't know. I don't know what that looks like. I think my advice just goes, you gotta be the outlier. Like, hey, we're in like if we think about health and fitness, right? Like we were talking about, like you're doing carnivore, animal based, right? Like food deserts are real. The food is highly nutritionally void and calorically dense.
Ultra processed. Soon we gonna have super ultra
processed. There you go.
Super sand processed food.
And so it's like, okay, how do you get in shape? The deck is stacked against you now when it comes to food. It just is what it is.
Yeah.
So what do you got to do? You got to be the outlier. You got to go. You got that's.
And you have to find radical solutions to radical problems.
Right.
That's really all it is. Like all life is problem solving. If you see a problem, try to find a way to solve it.
Yep.
That's the best way to be an innovator and make yourself valuable.
Yep. That's good.
But beyond just providing menial labor, you want to try to see where something is missing in society and say, you know what? I think I'm smart. If I'm smart enough to see that society is missing that, I'm smart enough to do something about it, and then I'm able to have create value out of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, even as far as like the carnivore diet, one of the things that attracted me to that is that it's something that's so easy. I mean, who can't take a steak and throw it on a pan for 4 minutes each side? You know, it's easy, it's very straightforward, it's very simple. I mean, you're not gonna find ultra processed steak. You just go to the grocery store and you get a steak.
Unless you get that, what is that called? That fake meat?
Right.
The vegan steak? What is that called?
Impossible.
That's ultra processed.
Right. It's like, you know, that you could get ground beef. There's a lot of stuff that you can do. I mean, even when there was a time when I was vegan, I was trying to figure out all my health stuff. And you know, there's an expensive way to be vegan and there's a cheap way to be vegan.
Yeah.
You know, if you're buying all that ultra processed stuff, all of these like products and whatnot, it's gonna be expensive.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. All right, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm gonna take my man Jeffrey to go get a steak right now. He's all the way out here from the East Coast. We're gonna drop by my church real quick, and then I'm gonna take him out to get a nice steak. Yeah, processed equals cancer. Guys, thank you so much. Check out Jeffrey's channel. It's just the Almonte Films.
The Almonte Films, yeah.
Almonte. I keep mispronouncing it. I'm so sorry. The Almonte Films. His testimony is crazy, man. He got a fire 2-hour testimony video on there, and then there's a clip of our conversation today on this channel. If you guys want to check that out, this will redirect to that, and the full podcast with me and him, over 2 hours long, going deeper into a story, is on the Patreon. So thank you guys so much for hanging out. I'll be back tomorrow. Appreciate all you guys. And we'll see you guys later. All right, we're out of here. Peace.